Hello, my name is Pyotr Topechkanov from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the Institute IMMO, and I'm happy to start a session, a discussion titled European Escalation and its Asian Fallout. This is a part of the conference Bay of Bengal Conversation organized this year, 2024, by the Center for Governance Studies in Dhaka, Bangladesh. The conference brings outstanding best of the best researchers and scholars from around from the world, and I'm happy that today we have two important and well-known experts to discuss the issues about escalation and the impact on Asia. Gregory Simons, Associate Professor, Toriba University in Riga, Latvia, you're welcome, and Victoria Panova, Head of the BRICS Expert Council, Russia. Welcome to the session. My first question would be to Victoria, to start with you, and then to you, Greg, about actually what does it mean European escalation? Because we have a lot of narrative existing around this event, starting with the official name in Russia, Special Military Operation, and ending with something like the beginning of the Third World War, or the war between Russia and the West, or Russia and Ukraine. What does it mean, the European escalation, for you? What is your perspective on that? Thank you.
Well, probably, first of all, allow me to thank organizers for inviting me here. I think it's an outstanding conference. We had a wonderful start this morning, and it was definitely interesting and very helpful and insightful to listen to all their speakers of their sessions today. Well, escalation, definitely. We are living in a world that is that's been experiencing geopolitical tensions, different sorts of escalations for not only the past 2-3 years. It's been in place, very visible, at least for the past decade and a half or so. And from that point of view, you know, different researchers, different observers, rather, right, would say that would name different types of conflicts that were ongoing, that this or that type of escalation would be there. So I would see that it's just another stage of rebalancing and the birth of the new world order that we are seeing. And unfortunately, as we know, the birth of the new world order has never been peaceful so far. Never. We never saw something new coming out without pain, without wars, conflicts, without misunderstandings and disagreements. Now, in a way, we came to the stage where conflict broke out much closer to what, as we say, the old concept of Europe is used to. They hoped that after World War II, something like this would be only relevant for, as they say, periphery, right? And we remember Josep Borrell saying that those could be relevant for the jungle, not the garden. But here we see it very close to the garden. And of course, from this point of view, this is extremely important and, let's say, much more serious for Europeans, because this type of conflict, including military activities, came very close to the door. So this is one point. But once again, this ongoing change of the world order, the birth of the new one, that's not a thing of yesterday. So that's been there. And if you look throughout the world, it's not about Europe only. We're used to saying that it's a Eurocentric, that used to be Europe-centric world, which is probably an overestimation in the world, because even after their World War II, for example, even though we saw their European consolidation, a lot of it was in effect led by overseas and helped by Marshall Plan, and then within the trilateral commission, not the triangular cooperation. So Euro-Atlantic, yes, used to be Euro-Atlantic world. And since the 90s, we saw first gradual, and then with their start of their tens of the 21st century, we saw this really shift, much faster one, of different powers to different other areas of the world. And that is why nowadays, when we're talking about even this area, in Russia we don't say much, it's Europe. We're talking about Eurasia. And what matters is Eurasia and a greater Eurasian partnership that has to involve Europe, and obviously, and at some point it will, I'm quite sure. But as I said, it's global in scale. We see some unrest ongoing, and there is a lot of talk now with Trump coming back, how much Taiwan and Asia and confrontation with China would come back to stage.
Yep.
We see a really terrifying situation in the Middle East. So this is something not to discard either. And in fact, each and every piece of the world we're witnessing today, not just Europe and not just Eurasia, they're very vulnerable and very fragile. And this is where I see this, note of escalation, not only by the term introduced recently, or let's say reinvigorated recently by Sergei Karaganov, the Russian political scientist, but in all terms, it's a fragile, fragmented, and very vulnerable world, not just Europe.
So I think you just ended your part of the answer with the title of our conference is Fractured World. So it's exactly in the line of the ideas behind the concept of the conference. But you mentioned that this conflict became much closer to Europe. What do you think? Do you think that the European countries are fully involved in this escalation? They are participating contributors, parts, victims. What is the role of European countries in this escalation?
Well, all of the wounds are self-inflicted because these so-called European leaders are not acting in their national interest. They're acting in the interest of Washington, D.C., if we want to put it this way, bluntly. They will do anything to please D.C. I mean, you just need to look at how they carry themselves in front of Biden. They look like schoolchildren before a headmaster. This is not equality here, or ranking in any way. It's an inner slave mentality which the European leaders have towards Washington, D.C., and especially those Democrats, because they have more of a tendency for these colour revolutions and these kinds of things. And I mean, this is the point why a lot of these things are happening in Europe at the moment. And I mean, you just need to listen. And I don't think they do. That what these US geopolitical scientists say, I mean, they state it outright. They're going to chew up and use European countries and spit them out. They're consumables. I mean, Kissinger was who said to be an enemy of the United States can be dangerous. To be a friend is fatal. And they say it outright. And these ones don't get it. And I mean, you have a look at that 2019 RAND report. I mean, that was a clear indication of what was going to happen. And I mean, you had the interference in Belarus, Kazakhstan, Well, they flipped Armenia, Pashinyan at least. And this was interesting that it wasn't Russia who told Azerbaijan to stop attacking Armenia. It was the United States. They are a client, under Pashinyan, they're a client state. And you can see, because this is about the US as a declining hegemon, wanting to grab hold of power and keep it. I mean, it's under Biden's name, but Biden isn't really cognitively capable of doing too much. Where he wrote this, I think it was 2019, about in foreign policy, about retaking America's leading position in the world. I mean, because as a declining hegemon, you have two options. You can challenge, or you can accommodate and facilitate a smoother decline. And they've chosen the first one, very much. And you can see this is not only about Russia. I mean, even before the SMO began, I mean, you had these American politicians salivating because they thought, oh, we're going to inflict another Afghanistan. And this was one of the things on Russia. So they're living in the past, a very delusional past. And so they believed that this would destroy Russia. But the intention is not only to weaken and contain Russia, it's to weaken Europe as an economic competitor. Because about 6-7 years ago, the combined GDP of the EU countries was about 5% more than the US. 5 years later, with the war in Ukraine, is 50% less. So, I mean, and you can see what a basket case Germany is, the so-called economic powerhouse. Russia's the number one economy in Europe now. And I mean, this is from the World Bank. It's not only from Russian sources. So, but they still have their inner slave mentality. They have to obey. But now, I think, to increase the fracturing a bit more, if we want to put it in this way, now they have a massive dilemma. Trump is back. And a lot of these idiots, and that's a kind word to call them, were working actively against Trump. I mean, Starmer sent a team of propagandists over to assist. You had all these Swedish cultural Marxists flocking over there in droves, and now they're crying lots of tears. They cannot understand what has happened. And, I mean, Macron, he's another one. But the funniest one of all was Zelensky. I mean, he really put back the wrong horse. Because he believed the propaganda of the Democrats that Trump was going to lose and that he better show his patron respect and gratitude. Like, that didn't work out so well. And now, and I mean, this is the whole point about it. Now you can see, I mean, which is going to be interesting, and I'll finish on this. I mean, you got Trump, who's trying to force elections on the very democratic Ukraine so that they have to hold elections, even though, I mean, no one legitimate is anywhere in government because they don't have elections. You also have Tulsi Gabbard is the DNI nominee. He's also on the Mirotvorets hit list. So, and Zelensky has been insulting Trump. Now, the only reason he was hanging around a bit more, because the Democrats, for whatever reason, I can't really understand, they decided they needed to keep the war going until after the election, because then they don't have to concede that they're defeated by Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine. But now they've lost, Trump has won, and Trump is making noises about, and you can see the whole propaganda apparatus. You shouldn't be thinking about territory. The whole media narrative is changing. You should be thinking about peace. Ultimately, it's going, instead of Afghans dropping off American transport planes leaving, it'll be Ukrainians as the last one leaves. And the only thing will be who manages to put the coup de grace into Zelensky and Project Ukraine, because liberals, Western liberals, and especially Democrats, are very bitter, twisted people, and they're vindictive. And so they don't want Trump to take credit for peace in Ukraine. The political calculations are different now. It's no longer to keep the war going. They've got until January to do what, for example, they did in Afghanistan. And so I'll end on that happy note.
At least it's about the prospect for peace. Thank you so much, Greg, for sharing this. It's about a painful process, as Victoria rightly put it, about a new world order. And the question is, well, what does it mean actually for Asian countries? At the beginning, famously, Minister of India, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, mentioned that, please, in Europe, you don't think that every European problem is the problem of the world. What now, after a few years spent in this confrontation, and Asian countries are more involved, what do you think it means in terms of politics? It's not about military, it's about politics, it's about growing role of these countries in the world order, and the visit of, for instance, Narendra Modi to Moscow and to Kiev to play some bigger role in European affairs. And in general, it's not about Modi, it's about Asian countries. What do you think about that?
Well, if you allow, I will in fact start answering your question from the previous hypothesis offered by Craig, because, looking into retrospective, you would see, it's a good lesson for Asia. You see that Europe is consumed, so being fatal to be an ally. But it's not the first time that we saw it. You remember there were several times when we saw, it's an economic miracle, Japanese economic miracle. Who brought it down? Look who started the trade war against Japan, who seemed to be growing fast and becoming top economy in the world. It was its ally. Similarly, of course, it wasn't that big of a threat. Look at they used to be called at that point the New Asian Tigers. So it wasn't also the support from the United States, as they're still kind of not declining at this pace hegemon, but still each time they were experiencing certain problems, which made them consume their allies in order to continue growing and continue being afloat. And this way, I think it's a very good lesson for Asia to realize that even if you are approached by the United States, be it within Quad, be it within AUKUS, be it within, free trade agreements, it's a bit more tricky because it's been a reverse in some way. But in any case, there is no free cheese for a mouse. And you cannot be ensuring that there will be extra investments or extra economic cooperation that will be benefiting for good, for mutual benefit, countries in Asia. So this is something to remember and have in mind. And that is why it is extremely relevant, be it India, be it China, be it Bangladesh or any other country, yes, you can be getting in a short term some kind of benefits
Mhm.
from the United States. But it's not in order to bring about the new miracle. This would not be an ongoing process, and this would not benefit those countries. So you should rely on yourself, be
Mhm.
pragmatic, and ensure that you can strike cooperation with regards to your national interests, something that we don't see, unfortunately, in Europe. You're very right, like especially this is so visible with this change in percent of production. And I mean, and probably this is also like what we had in like Russia now, because nobody in his or her own mind would ever agree to kill their own economy and to undermine their well-being of their people. Not in Europe. But for Asian leaders, it is important to keep this in mind. They have it in mind now. And I think this is the biggest implication and biggest lesson. That's number one. And number two, it's also what we saw at some point as a common good and what was propagated as a common good is not as such. It could be easily turned into a weapon. We saw it with the use of dollar, use of SWIFT. We saw it with regards to Russia mostly. But in fact, if you look at the reactions, each and every country now understands if they do something wrong, wrong according to American view or globalist view, they would suffer because they can be this could be switched off. So it is important for Asian countries, we have the name world majority, but you can call global South, global East, it doesn't matter. So it is important for the countries to be thinking of not countering scenarios, but alternative mechanisms in order to ensure they are independent and sovereign choices. So, and I think this is another very important lesson for Asia, but not only for Asia, it's a lesson for a global scope.
Thank you, Victoria. And of course, it reminds about alternative mechanisms, including the BRICS one.
Oh, NDB, but not
many-
only CRA.
Yes,
Yeah.
and many others. Greg, you mentioned that a process that authors and observers discuss a lot about decline of the United States, and the process may be for a long period of time. It's not just an immediate event; it's a long. But what next? Because some authors propose that it's a question about now. It's about United States, and we have China, and the Chinese are all much bigger and important after all these events, and Europe also tries navigate to establish better relations with China. So, what is your take on that? What is new order with the focus on Asia, and what's the play China playing in Europe right now in this context? What do you think?
Well, I mean, you can see, I mean, Europe is still deluded that it is some kind of power. It lives in the past. I mean, at the very best, it's a vassal. I mean, it's this beast of a bureaucratic empire that is degenerate and degrading. And, I mean, it's going to collapse under its own weight eventually, because it's just not sustainable. And especially when the main economy which was driving it has been deindustrialized, not by Russia, by themselves. And I mean, it's just going to increase because, I mean, one of the main differences between, if we want to say, global north and global south, the global north is deeply ideological. It is messianic. It has this kind of desire. I mean, like this nonsense by Fukuyama, end of history. I mean, that if that's not messianism, I don't know what is. and they're arrogant, and also I think one can say delusional, because they live in this what would you call it, this echo chamber, and they're so out of touch with the average person. And you compare that with what the Global South does. I mean, they're pragmatic. Ideology is not something to mess around with. Why? And instead of having a zero-sum game, it's a win-win. Instead of using institutions as coercion and hierarchical, it's a win-win, and it's non-hierarchical. You have interests which are being pursued, not ideology. So, I mean, the future is with the Global South for sure. I mean, just to give you one example, I mean, from my native country. So they have this woke hiring practices in the government circles in New Zealand, and in the armed forces they hire minorities, DEI, and diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And recently they had a ship, a support ship, which was captained by a woman, but she was not only a woman, but a lesbian, so 2 of these boxes were ticked. And she managed to get it on some rocks. And so the ship is in the bottom of the sea. It was 100 million New Zealand dollars sitting on the bottom of the Pacific Islands. And the naval personnel had to be rescued by the locals. At its last indignity. But I mean, that's where this global north is going with these stupid ideas. I mean, it's not something, and I mean, they have these delusions, like our famous gardener Burrell, when he was addressing a Latin American conference, and why they did not kill him on the spot, I don't know. But he implored the Latin American audience that they should join forces and build a new world order, just like the conquistadors did. So,
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, this is where they're at. And they think that they still have this appeal. I mean, G7 is the collection of the most bankrupt countries in the world. If you're looking at BRICS, it's quite something else. I mean, these are up-and-coming countries. They're growing. They're not in decline. And it's something very different. And so there is this arrogance and attempt, for example, to pressure India, and this economic warfare. And I mean, all of these things that the rules-based order does, which is illegal in so many different shades according to international law, because they can't see what's wrong with carrying out a genocide, the most televised and disseminated genocide ever, because that is defensive, as opposed to Ukraine, which is what was it, unprovoked full-scale invasion. I think that's the one. And now the rest of the rest, shall we say, see it for what it is.
Yes, we have 1 minute left, but I have a question for you, very brief, please be short. Can Asia fix Europe, the European problems and confrontations? What is your take on that? Can Asia help us in Europe fix our problems? So please, Greg, starting with you.
Potentially, but Europe is in a deep suicidal, self-destructive state.
Okay.
So if Europe doesn't accept because they want to be the lackey of the US, then no one can help them. They will go there.
Very sad.
And it's already, I think, close to being beyond help.
Okay, very sad. But Victoria, what do you think?
I think that you have to. You know, we had this funny slogan in the Soviet times that the business of their drowning person is their, you know, to save him or herself is the business of this drowning person. Right?
Absolutely.
So I guess in this regard, this is very relevant, and because I think Asia should go ahead with its pragmatic interests. If Europe finally realizes and chooses, because it has to be sovereign, this cannot be imposed. And that's what BRICS is striving for. We say we cannot impose our will or our interests or our values on others.
Mhm.
If they perceive it that, okay, this is not something they want, this is against their interest, they would change the past, they would change the leaders, and they would go together with Asia in order to see a better future together with the world majority. But this is the way to do for themselves, not for somebody else.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you so much, Greg, for your honest conversation and your remarks, insights. And I recommend our listeners to follow the pages and the information, social media and mass media about the events and conversations that Gregory Simons and Victoria Panova have and will have in future. And of course, follow Bay of Bengal Conversation. It's a huge event bringing many people, many voices, and very interesting insights. Thank you.